The air in Crescent Ridge hung heavy with the intoxicating scent of pine and damp earth, mingled with the metallic tang of anticipation and the sweet nervousness that permeated the moon ceremony. It was a full moon night, the kind that looked painted by an artist, with the silver orb suspended in the dark sky like a giant chandelier, a mystic beacon for Lycan hearts. The pack, gathered in the central clearing, buzzed with low voices, a mix of gossip and anxiety, but respectful silence would fall in waves every time a young Lycan was called forward, their eyes fixed on the Alpha, awaiting the bond's confirmation. For 20-year-old Maya, every beat of her heart felt like the echoing ancestral drum of the ceremony, a rhythm that promised or destroyed destinies. She was an Omega, and that already placed her in a delicate position, almost invisible to many, like a withered leaf amidst a lush garden. Her transformation powers, unlike those of other Lycans, were considered weak, inconsistent, like a flame that flickered without ever truly taking hold, incapable of warming anything. She felt like a crystal vase about to fall and shatter, yet there was a stubborn thread of hope in her chest, a silent prayer that Alpha Theron, her pack leader, and the most coveted man in Crescent Ridge, would recognize her as his mate. After all, fate was blind, wasn't it? Theron was everything an Alpha should be. Tall, muscular, with a presence that filled the space, and a golden gaze that could both soothe and ignite, a true Hollywood heartthrob, but with an aura of power that went far beyond the screen. He was the kind of Lycan who would make anyone bow, the gold standard in the kingdom of Eldoria, the alpha of alphas in many's perception. Maya watched him from afar, her heart lodged in her throat, feeling the warmth of the bonfires and the cold grip of apprehension. The flames danced, casting long, phantasmal shadows that seemed to mock her fragility, her small hope. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the inner wolf quivering, not from fear, but from a dizzying mix of longing and dread. When her name was called, Maya, daughter of Alara, the elder's voice seemed to tear the air, laden with a formality that only heightened her nervousness. She stepped forward, each movement an effort, feeling the eyes of everyone on her, heavy as stones. The walk to the center of the clearing, under the relentless full moon, felt like an eternity, each second a torture. The pack's whispers ceased completely, and a tense silence settled, heavy as the forest's humidity before a storm. Alpha Theron stood there, imposing, his golden eyes fixed on her, like a predator assessing its prey. Maya waited, her heart pounding, the scent of pine and earth intensifying, mingled with his strong woody scent, a smell that should have been comforting, but now only brought more anxiety. She expected to feel the warmth of recognition, the spark of the bond meant to ignite between fated mates, a connection Lycans called the moon goddess's blessing. Instead, what she felt was a glacial chill, a cutting indifference that made her shrink inside, as if her entire being were freezing. He stared at her for a long moment, and what she saw in his eyes was not the love or recognition of an alpha for his Luna, but blatant disdain, almost amusement, like someone watching a tasteless comedy show. Then, he let out a laugh. Not a warm or amused laugh, but a cruel, guttural sound that echoed through the clearing, shattering the ceremony's sacred silence. That laugh, laden with scorn, tore the fabric of the night, and more importantly, tore the last thread of hope within Maya, leaving her in tatters. The pack, who moments before had been silent, began to murmur, their gazes turning to her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, as if she were the main act in a horror show. "I need a warrior, not a weakling," he spat, and the words, sharp as blades, pierced Maya, one by one, reaching her soul, leaving an invisible trail of blood. His tone was one of utter contempt, as if she were less than nothing, a hindrance, a joke. "How do you expect me to lead a pack with an Omega who can barely hold her own form? A Luna needs to be strong, needs to be a pillar, needs to be the face of strength, not a rag doll that falls apart in the wind. His words were not just a rejection. They were a public humiliation, a testament to her uselessness for all of Crescent Ridge, branded with hot iron into her memory. The pain of the severed bond was immediate, visceral, as if a part of her, her very essence, had been violently ripped away, leaving a gaping, bleeding hole. She fell to her knees on the damp earth, strength abandoning her legs, her knees hitting the ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo in her head. The physical pain was almost unbearable, but the pain of rejection, of shame burning on her face, as if she'd been slapped with a gauntlet, was even worse. Blood seemed to drain from her veins, and the world spun, threatening to pull her into darkness. Tears streamed down, mixing with the dust of the clearing, and she felt the gaze of everyone, each one an overwhelming weight, a silent judgment. Some looked at her with pity, others with scorn, and some, the cruelest, with ill-disguised satisfaction, as if they were watching a sensational reality TV drama where the heroine got her dramatic downfall. Her reputation, her hope, everything she had built and dreamed, crumbled there, under the merciless moonlight. She lay there, prostrate, feeling like the most insignificant creature in the universe, her heart in pieces, when suddenly, the ground trembled. It wasn't a common tremor, like those that sometimes shook the region due to a geological fault. No, this was different. It was a deep tremor, coming from the Earth's very core, a grave, resonant sound that vibrated in the bones of everyone present, like distant thunder, but coming from below. A sepulchral silence descended upon Crescent Ridge, heavy and dense, while the very earth seemed to groan. It wasn't a mere tremor. It was the manifestation of an ancestral force, a dormant power awakening. From the densest, most impenetrable shadows of the Shadowfen woods, bordering the ceremony clearing, a colossal form began to materialize, as if darkness itself took shape, condensing into pure majesty. It was a figure that seemed to defy logic and reality itself, woven from a power so ancient that even the moonlight appeared to recede before it. His steps weren't heard, but felt, each movement unleashing a wave of energy that made the air thrum, charged with an almost palpable electricity. The creature that emerged was Supreme King Kalen, a name whispered in legends, a living myth who hadn't attended a marking ceremony in centuries. His stature defied comprehension, easily exceeding 7 feet, a mountain of muscle and presence. Broad, defined shoulders, a body sculpted for combat and command, cloaked in black leather attire that absorbed the scant ambient light, making him even darker and more intimidating. Every fiber of his being exuded an authority that froze the blood in the veins of all present. His eyes, an electric blue so intense they resembled frozen flames, swept over the stunned crowd. Wherever they landed, breath hitched, fear rooted deeply in the soul. No one dared to move a muscle, not even breathe deeply. Alpha Theron, who moments before had strutted in his arrogance, now blanched to an almost ghostly pallor. His eyes, once filled with disdain and pride, widened in pure terror, and he instinctively recoiled, tripping over his own feet. The weight of the king's aura was crushing, an invisible force that cornered him, diminishing him to nothing. Kalen, however, didn't grant Theron even a single glance. His presence was as magnetic as gravity itself, and his attention was fixed on a single point, a single person. He walked directly toward Maya, ignoring the paralyzed crowd, their gazes filled with shock and terror. His stride was deliberate, powerful, yet strangely focused. Maya, still prostrate on the cold, damp ground, felt the searing pain of rejection tearing at her heart, mingled now with the overwhelming shock of the king's appearance. Her mind reeled in a whirlwind of emotions, humiliation fresh, shame burning, and Kalen's imposing presence ripped the air from her lungs. She couldn't tear her gaze from the approaching heavy black leather boots, knowing they belonged to the feared Supreme King. Then, in an act that defied all logic and the millennial Lycan hierarchy. An unthinkable gesture for a monarch of his status. Kalen knelt. The knee pad of his leather suit touched the cold earth, bringing him to Maya's eye level. He leaned slightly, the vastness of his body hovering over her, but without oppression, only a protective presence. The proximity was breathtaking, the scent of ancient forest, moss, and a hint of something wild and untamed enveloped her. His electric eyes, once so distant and fearsome, now gazed at her with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her soul. His voice, a deep growl that resonated not only in the air, but in the very bones of all present, shattered the silence with the force of thunder. "He rejected you because he is blind." The words were a judgment, a sentence. "But I see a queen." The impact of his words was seismic, turning Maya's world and all Lycans present completely upside down. A queen. Her? An Omega with no visible powers, publicly rejected, now seen as a queen by the most powerful Lycan who had ever existed. Maya's scent, a subtle blend of damp earth after rain and wild jasmine, was for Kalen the perfume of his fated mate. It wasn't a scent he expected to find, but it was unmistakable. The aroma he had sought for centuries, a certainty that had crossed ages of solitude and power. His inner wolf, dormant for so long in resignation, howled in triumph, recognizing his mate, his Luna, his other half. The bond formed instantly, an electrical current that united them. Right there, in front of everyone, Kalen marked her. His large, strong hand gently lifted Maya's chin, and his mouth inclined to her neck. The bite was quick, deep, a shock of pain and pleasure that coursed through Maya's body, making her gasp. The sensation of his fangs piercing her skin, the visceral connection solidifying, was an act of possession and protection as ancient as time itself. An unbreakable bond was sealed, a destiny rewritten. The crowd, previously in shock, now mingled terror and surprise in their gazes. Whispers began to ripple through, but were swiftly silenced by the king's quiet authority. Alpha Theron watched the scene, paralyzed, terrified to his core. His eyes were fixed on the woman he had just called weak, the very woman now claimed by the most powerful and feared Lycan to exist. Humiliation was a bitter poison spreading through his veins, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that his life would never be the same. The future he had planned for himself and his pack crumbled like a sandcastle, replaced by a nightmare where he, the arrogant Alpha, would have to bow to the woman he had broken. The air around Kalen and Maya pulsed with primal power, an undeniable testament to the new queen who had risen from the ashes of rejection. Still reeling from the abrupt turn of events, Maya barely registered Kalen's powerful arms lifting her, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, away from the dust of Crescent Ridge and the shocked gazes following her. The transition wasn't just abrupt. It was a veritable tsunami, dragging her from her simple, predictable life into a whirlwind of luxury and power that stole her breath. Suddenly, she wasn't the unremarkable Omega anymore, but the mate of the Supreme King, a legendary figure whose name few dared even utter. The journey to Highfort Citadel was a blur, a jumble of images blending together. Kalen's incredible speed, the wind on her face, the constant feel of his muscles beneath her palm, and the silent promise of a new reality unfolding before her. Highfort Citadel itself was a spectacle, something out of a fairy tale, yet with a terrifying grandeur. It wasn't just a castle. It was a city within walls, a colossal dark stone fortress rising against the night sky, with towers that seemed to scratch the clouds and windows gleaming like golden eyes in the gloom. Stepping through its massive gates, Maya felt the weight of Eldoria's history in every stone, every carved archway. The place was a labyrinth of ancient corridors and grand halls, where Lycan magic seemed to breathe in every corner, an echo of centuries of power and secrets. Torchlight danced on the gleaming armor of the Lycan guards, taller and more muscular than any man she'd ever seen. And the silence was so dense it seemed to swallow even her own footsteps. Maya, accustomed to the rustic simplicity of her small home in Crescent Ridge, felt like a fish out of water, a wild daisy transplanted into an imperial garden. Every step on the polished floors, every gaze that followed her through the sumptuous halls, seemed to scream her inadequacy. The court Lycans, elegant and imposing figures, observed her with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and at times a hint of distrust that made her shrink inward. She could feel the whispers, the silent judgments about the rejected Omega, who, by some twist of fate, had been chosen by the king himself. It was like being in the middle of a sensational reality TV drama, where everyone had an opinion about the new character who had appeared out of nowhere. Kalen, for his part, was the embodiment of possessiveness. From the moment he marked her, he hadn't left her side for a second. His electric blue eyes, capable of freezing the soul of anyone who dared challenge him, were always fixed on her, a constant beacon that both guided and held her captive. He kept her close, his large, warm hand often resting on her waist or back, a constant reminder that she was his and under his unwavering protection. His scent, woody and wild, enveloped her like a cloak, a strange and overwhelming comfort. He spoke little, but every gesture, every look, every flex of his powerful muscles conveyed a clear message. You are mine, and no one will dare touch you. For him, the idea of leaving her unattended was unthinkable, a risk he wasn't willing to take. It was a kind of attention she'd never experienced, a control that, while protective, also suffocated her a little, as if she were trapped in a golden cage. Yet, behind the facade of serenity she tried to maintain, Maya battled internally with her insecurities. The pain of Alpha Theron's public rejection still haunted her, an open wound in her soul that refused to heal. His words, "I need a warrior, not a weakling," echoed in her mind like a cruel mantra, eroding her already fragile self-esteem. With every step through Highfort Citadel's grand corridors, she questioned if she truly possessed the strength and wisdom required for such a role. To be a queen, her? The idea felt like too heavy a burden for her shoulders, a responsibility that crushed her before she even began. She felt small and inadequate against the immensity of her new world, a grain of sand on an infinite beach. The responsibilities and expectations were overwhelming. She barely understood court etiquette, the complex hierarchies, the whispers, and the power plays unfolding around her. Kalen seemed to expect an innate understanding of her new role, but Maya was lost, fumbling in the dark. She saw herself as an imposter, fearing that at any moment someone would realize she was just an ordinary Omega, without remarkable transformation powers, without the imposing presence expected of a Lycan queen. Solitude, paradoxically, seemed to follow her even amidst so many people. Surrounded by counselors, guards, and nobles, she felt more alone than ever, isolated by her own inexperience and the chasm separating her from her former life. It was as if she were on an island, watching a continent she could never reach, even with Kalen beside her, a giant of power and protection, who saw a queen in her where she only saw a shadow. She wondered if she would ever manage to fill the shoes destiny had placed on her feet, or if she would forever be just the rejected Omega, a mere reflection of the king who had chosen her. In Highfort Citadel, Maya's life was a whirlwind of new responsibilities and curious gazes, each one pressing down on her shoulders like an unseen burden. The palace, a labyrinth of ancient stone and silent power, was a simmering cauldron of diverse personalities, from Supreme King Kalen's most loyal advisors to ancient Lycans who carried the history of Eldoria in their scars and gazes. Lyra, a senior advisor with silver hair falling in a pristine braid and eyes that seemed to have witnessed ages past, observed Maya with a palpable mix of curiosity and an almost cold distrust. She had served Supreme King Kalen for centuries, long enough to know the court was a minefield of intrigue and ambition. New faces, to Lyra, were always an unknown, and an Omega who seemed so fragile, though now marked by the Supreme King, did not inspire her immediate confidence. In her mind, a Lycan queen needed to be strong, unshakable, and Maya, with her still uncertain aura, looked more like a delicate flower amidst a garden of thorns. As Maya tried to adapt to the oppressive grandeur of High Fort Citadel and the scrutinizing gazes, news of her marking by Supreme King Kaelin spread like wildfire throughout the vast kingdom of Eldoria. Every pack, every Lycan, from isolated villages to larger settlements, heard the whispers, the gossip, and the speculations. The rejection of an Omega by her fated Alpha was one thing, but her subsequent claim by the Supreme King was an unprecedented event, a dramatic twist worthy of a sensational reality TV drama that humans devoured on their bright screens. Far away, in Crescent Ridge, Alpha Theron was in a torment of rage and humiliation that consumed him from within. His pride, once inflated and unshakable, had been publicly crushed, not just by being overridden by the king, but by breaking the bond with his fated mate, only to watch her be elevated to a position he could never reach. He was the alpha of his pack, yes, but now he was forced to bow his head before the woman he had called weak, the very one he had discarded as unworthy. The memory of Supreme King Kaelin's roar and the look of scorn he'd received burned in his mind like a living ember. Theron felt like a mangy dog kicked from the yard, while the female he'd scorned was paraded into the palace. His wounded pride gave him no peace. Like a Lycan with a bone caught in his throat, he stewed in the injustice, seeking ways to destabilize Maya's position, even if subtly and cowardly. He began to spread venomous rumors, small poisons whispered in dark corners and secret meetings. An Omega without strong powers? Supreme King Kaelin must have lost his mind, hasn't he? What will a weak one like her do to protect Eldoria? Doesn't he see the true threat approaching, choosing a mate so unworthy? Theron's words were like a slow poison, designed to erode the foundation of respect Maya hadn't yet earned for herself, questioning the king's wisdom, and by extension, the new queen's legitimacy. He wanted the court and the people of Eldoria to doubt, to see her as he saw her, a fraud, a usurper. Supreme King Kaelin, with his sharp perception and his network of informants that stretched across the entire kingdom, was aware of the tension simmering. He sensed the skeptical gazes, heard the malicious whispers, and perceived Theron's attempts to undermine Maya's authority. His protective Lycan instinct, already fierce, intensified daily. He kept Maya close, his imposing presence a shield against any harm. But Kaelin didn't want a queen who hid behind him. He encouraged her, with his deep voice and piercing gaze, to find her own voice, to stand on her own. He brought her to council meetings, a formal and intimidating environment where ancient Lycans debated the fates of Eldoria. Maya, sitting beside the king, felt small and invisible. But Kaelin forced her to listen, to observe, and occasionally, to voice an opinion. He introduced her to important figures of the kingdom, alphas from distant packs, border guardians, influential merchants. Each encounter was a challenge, forcing her to confront her fears of inadequacy and to begin to understand the complexity of Lycan governance. It wasn't just about power and brute strength, but about diplomacy, strategy, and the ability to read intentions behind every smile and every word. Kaelin pushed her out of her comfort zone, knowing that only then could she flourish and become the queen he saw in her, the queen Eldoria needed, even if she still felt like an Omega, lost amidst a sea of seasoned wolves hungry for any sign of weakness. Though insecurity clung like a lost pup, a quiet current of determination and sharp observation simmered beneath Maya's fragile exterior. No longer the naive Omega from Crescent Ridge, she was now acutely aware of the court's power plays. Each day at High Fort Citadel was an unsolicited masterclass. Maya keenly observed counselors, visiting alphas, betas, and omegas alike, absorbing whispered intrigues, veiled banquet comments, the intricate, unwritten Lycan etiquette, and Eldoria's complex politics. She grasped that hierarchy wasn't just brute strength. It was alliances, respect, or fear, and the subtle art of navigating inflated egos. Many still dismissed her as the weak one who'd somehow snared the Supreme King. She felt under the intense spotlight of a sensational reality TV drama. Every move judged, every glance a vote. One warm afternoon, yearning for a cool mountain stream dip and a refreshing berry smoothie, Maya sought reprieve in Highfort Citadel's vast gardens. Damp earth and exotic flowers soothed her soul. Deep within a dense, sky-kissing thicket, her keen Lycan eyes, even if without strong powers, caught movement. Hidden among hibiscus and colorful bromeliads, a tiny wolf pup with soft infant fur whimpered, a front paw clearly injured. Maya's heart ached, the sound echoing her own vulnerability. Others might have hesitated. A wild mother could tear apart any threat. Highfort Citadel's Lycan guards usually kept wild animals away, but this pup found refuge. Maya, however, ignored consequences. Her Omega instinct, connecting her to life and healing, eclipsed all fear. She knelt, cool earth under her knees, extending a gentle hand, murmuring low, comforting words more ancient than human speech. "Calm down, little one. I won't hurt you." The pup, with newborn blue eyes, met hers with pain and distrust. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed. The mother wolf emerged, large, imposing, amber eyes gleaming. A common Lycan would have fled, but Maya stood motionless, hand outstretched, feeling no fear, just a strange connection. Sadness in the wolf's eyes, a pain Maya understood. Instead of threat, she sensed maternal anguish. To any observer's surprise, the mother wolf halted feet away, muscles tense but unmoving, watching Maya with soul-penetrating intensity. With surprising calm, Maya spoke as if to an old friend. "He's hurt, Luna. I can help. I know how. I learned in Crescent Ridge, from the ancients." She pointed to the pup's injured paw. The mother wolf slowly bowed her head, an almost imperceptible sign of permission. Maya, with precise, gentle movements, examined the deep cut. She recalled herbs her Crescent Ridge healer grandmother had taught her, quickly scavenging plantain and yarrow, mashing them with saliva into a healing paste. The earthy, medicinal scent filled the air. As Maya applied the paste, Supreme King Kalen watched from Highfort Citadel's watchtower, unseen. His golden eyes, seeing a Lycan's soul, fixed on his mate. He saw it all. Other Lycan's caution, the mother wolf's protective fury, Maya's serene courage. That simple, revealing moment hit Kalen hard. He'd marked Maya by bond instinct, a queen's vision, but hadn't fully grasped her strength. Now, he understood. Theron's weakness wasn't powerlessness, but an older, deeper strength, an innate connection to nature, to the purest Lycan essence, an empathy and healing capacity rare, almost forgotten among modern Lycans focused on domination and war. My Luna isn't just a beautiful flower. She's the forest's root, Kalen thought, a soft growl of pride in his chest. That compassionate, courageous act, which many in court would deem naive recklessness, resonated with his wild self. It was gentleness taming the beast, light calming darkness, a power not of claws or fangs, but an aura of life and protection. Maya's quiet display of healing began to shift perceptions, even among skeptical court members. Lyra, Supreme King Kalen's senior counselor, witnessed the scene. Her polite skepticism for the new queen now gleamed with fresh interest. She'd seen Maya as fragile, unprepared for the crown's weight. But Maya's fearless connection to the wild through the pup and mother wolf revealed unexpected depth. Perhaps Supreme King Kalen saw something we mere mortals didn't at first, Lyra murmured, a pang of admiration rising. Lyra's flicker of admiration, subtle though it was, silently resonated throughout the High Fort Citadel, where the court of Eldoria still grappled with the new and unexpected power dynamic Maya's presence brought forth. Whispers and curious gazes followed the young queen wherever she went, a mix of forced respect and genuine curiosity. Maya, in turn, felt the weight of each of those stares, striving to bear her new crown with the dignity King Kaelin expected of her, even if, deep down, she still felt like the rejected Omega from Crescent Ridge. The king, always at her side, was an imposing fortress, a beacon of protection that warded off most malicious glances, but not all. Alpha Theron, exiled from his former status and forced to bow to Maya whenever she passed, felt the venom of humiliation corrode his soul with each passing day. For him, the ascension of the one he'd called weak was a personal affront, a blow to his masculinity and reputation that he could not forgive. His wounded pride was an open wound, festering and seeking vengeance. He spent his nights in the High Fort Citadel ruminating over the injustice, unable to accept that fate had turned its back on him so brutally and unexpectedly. The idea that Maya, a mere Omega with no visible powers, was now the queen of all Lycans and his sovereign, was a cup of bitter gall he was forced to drink each dawn. He needed to get his revenge, to show everyone that King Kaelin had been mistaken, that Maya was, indeed, the weak Omega he had rejected. The opportunity arose during one of the grand royal banquets in the High Fort Citadel, a celebration that gathered alphas and advisors from across the entire kingdom of Eldoria. The main hall, adorned with rich tapestries and illuminated by hundreds of candles, buzzed with animated conversation and the clinking of goblets, to the tune of soft music that lulled the night. The main table, a spectacle of delicacies, from succulent prime rib, gourmet cheeses, fresh seasonal produce, and rich seafood dishes, was the center of attention. With Maya seated beside the imposing King Kaelin, her presence a mixture of grace and nervousness. She wore a night blue silk gown, a gift from the king, which highlighted the color of her eyes and made her appear a true sovereign, despite the insecurity that still haunted her. Lyra, the senior advisor, watched Maya discreetly, noticing her upright posture and her attempt to mask her discomfort, a small flame of admiration growing in her chest. At the height of the feast, when laughter and joy filled the air, a messenger, a visibly nervous low-ranking Lycan, made his way through the crowd. He approached the royal table, carrying a package wrapped in coarse fabric. Silence began to spread like a virus, as curious eyes turned towards the scene. The messenger bowed deeply, avoiding King Kaelin's icy gaze, and extended the package to Maya. "A gift, Queen Maya," he stammered, his voice barely audible, "from Alpha Theron." A shiver of apprehension swept through the hall. Theron's name, pronounced in such a formal context, was a dissonance in the festive melody. Maya felt a chill down her spine, a bad premonition. With slightly trembling hands, she unwrapped the package. Inside, to everyone's horror, was an old torn cloak, its fabric tattered and stained with dirt, exactly the same one she had worn on the day of her rejection in Crescent Ridge. Attached to the cloak was a note, written in elegant calligraphy, yet laden with venom. Maya picked up the paper and read in silence. "Lest the queen forget her humble origins and who she truly is. Rags suit you more than silk." Shame flooded Maya's face like a wave of fire, burning her cheeks and making her eyes well up. The air seemed to thin in the hall. Whispers ceased. Everyone held their breath, awaiting the queen's reaction, or perhaps more precisely, the king's. Maya felt a lump in her throat, the pain of public humiliation returning with full force, as if the day of her rejection were repeating itself right there, before the entire court. She clutched the note in her hand, her nails digging into her palm. For an instant, the weak, powerless girl from Crescent Ridge threatened to overwhelm her again. But before the humiliation could take root, before the tears could fall, a large, strong hand covered hers, squeezing it gently. King Kaelin, whose presence was already imposing, now exuded an aura of danger that froze the blood in the veins of all present. His eyes, previously focused on Maya, now turned to the messenger, and the Lycan trembled so violently he seemed about to faint. Kaelin's gaze was like blades of ice, cutting through the courage of the poor messenger and anyone who dared mock his queen. With a slow and deliberate movement, King Kaelin took the old, torn cloak from Maya's hands, ignoring the note she still clutched. He raised it high in the air, so everyone could see the worn, valueless fabric, the symbol of Theron's pathetic attempt to denigrate his mate. Then, with an imperious gesture and a force that made the fabric scream, he tore the cloak to shreds, a loud, decisive sound that echoed in the silent room. The Lycans in the court gasped. Without hesitation, Kaelin tossed the rags into the nearest crackling fireplace, watching them consume themselves in flames. "My queen does not dress in rags," he growled, his voice low, but carrying a threat so palpable it vibrated in the bones of all present. "She dresses in dignity and power, and anyone who tries to dress her in shame will pay a price that not even hell can match." The last sentence was uttered with such a grave and final tone, it made the messenger stumble backward, almost falling. The message was more than clear. Theron had underestimated not only Kaelin's protection, but the depth of his loyalty and the danger of his wrath. The incident, orchestrated to humiliate Maya, had the opposite effect. Instead of diminishing her, the public rejection and subsequent claiming by the Supreme King of all Lycans, Kaelin, had ignited a spark of something new within Maya, something she was only just beginning to comprehend. Yet, despite the protective warmth and Kaelin's imposing presence, which loomed over her like an ancient guardian, the young Omega still wrestled with a persistent sense of displacement. The grand halls of the High Fort Citadel, with their towering ceilings and tapestries narrating centuries of Lycan history, seemed to suffocate her. Every step echoed, every glance from the court members seemed laden with expectation or judgment, making her feel like a rare specimen, on display in a glass case, not a queen in her own right. It was as if she were trapped in a gilded cage, no matter how bright and luxurious it might be. The routine of her new life, filled with duties and ceremonies she barely understood, made her yearn for the simplicity of her former existence in Crescent Ridge. She missed the freedom to walk barefoot on the dew-kissed grass, to smell the damp earth and wild flowers without the constant vigilance of guards or the pressure of curious courtly eyes. Kaelin, always attentive to her nuances, perceived the melancholy in her honey-colored eyes, but even he, with all his power and ancestral intuition, could not fully penetrate the barrier of her silent anguish. He enveloped her in his strong arms, murmured promises of protection, and whispered words of love in his ancient tongue. But the root of her discomfort was deeper than the fear of external enemies. It was an internal battle, a search for her own place in the world. One night, as the full moon bathed the peaks of the High Fort Citadel with a silvery, mystical light, Maya found refuge in the castle's vast library. It was a sanctuary of silence and wisdom, with shelves that stretched endlessly upwards, filled with ancient scrolls, dusty tomes, and leather-bound volumes that seemed to guard the secrets of forgotten ages. The scent of old paper and magic hung in the air, a balm for her restless soul. As her fingers glided over the spine of a rune-covered book, a figure emerged from the deepest shadows of the library. It was Elder Alara, an ancient Lycan with piercing eyes that seemed to have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Her skin was marked by the wrinkles of time, but her posture was erect, and her mind, sharper than any blade. Alara had been a counselor to Lycan kings for countless generations, a guardian of ancient scrolls and forgotten prophecies, and her presence there was as natural as the millennial dust that adorned the books. Alara, with her innate wisdom and a gaze that seemed to pierce the soul, perceived the silent anguish corroding Maya. She offered no advice on court etiquette or how to please nobles, but rather on inner strength, that which springs from the deepest part of one's being. "My dear," Ilara's voice was a low whisper, like dry leaves in the wind. "You see yourself as a fragile omega in a world of alphas, don't you?" But strength does not reside only in muscles or battle cries. It manifests in countless forms, like the waters of a river that, though gentle, carves mountains over time. She spoke of the importance of embracing one's true essence, of not trying to transform into something one was not, but rather allowing one's true nature to flourish. The greatest leaders, Alara continued, her eyes fixed on Maya's, have emerged from the most improbable circumstances, from the shadows of rejection, from the quietness of observation. They didn't roar louder, but listened more intently. The elder shared stories of other Omegas who, despite their seemingly subservient position in the Lycan hierarchy, had played crucial roles in Eldoria's history. She told of an Omega who, with her empathy, averted an imminent war by understanding an enemy's pain, of another who, with her keen intuition, uncovered a betrayal that threatened the throne, and of a third who, with her unwavering resilience, kept hope alive in her people during the darkest times. "Your kindness, Maya," Alara said, holding the young woman's hand with surprising strength, "your ability to feel and to connect are your greatest attributes. Your resilience, the way you rose after humiliation, is a power in itself. It is not a weakness. It is the glue that binds a people, the light that guides in the darkness." The conversation with Alara was a balm for Maya's soul, a powerful reminder that her strength did not need to be that of a Lycan warrior, that her Omega essence was not a flaw, but a virtue. She began to understand that her gentleness and empathy were, in fact, her greatest attributes, and that her resilience, the ability to rise again even when the world seemed to crumble, was an intrinsic power, a silent yet unbreakable force. That interaction marked the beginning of a mentorship that would become fundamental to Maya's journey. Alara guided her through ancient scrolls, revealing secrets of her ancestral lineage, teaching her to listen to the whispers of the moon and to trust her intuition, which was sharper than any sword. In time, Maya flourished. The halls of the High Fort Citadel, once oppressive, now felt like a home where she, with Alara's help, was learning to weave her own tapestry. Each day, her confidence grew, and her bond with Kaelin deepened, transforming into something even more powerful. He was not just her destined mate, the supreme king who had claimed her. He was her safe harbor, the pillar that supported her as she found her own feet as queen. Kaelin observed her transformation with an almost palpable pride, his golden eyes fixed on her, noticing the new light radiating from his mate, the flame Alara had helped ignite. The fragile, precious one was revealing herself to be a force of nature, a queen, worthy of her throne and her king. Maya's ascent did not go unnoticed. Lord Valerius, the renegade Lycan who lurked in the shadows, seeking to destabilize the kingdom of Eldoria, tried to exploit old tensions and Maya's apparent inexperience. He orchestrated minor uprisings and spread venomous rumors, hoping to sow discord. But the new Maya, guided by Alara's wisdom and Kaelin's unwavering protection, was prepared. Instead of confronting force with force, she used her empathy and her ability to listen. She approached the leaders of distant villages, heard their grievances, and, with Kaelin's help, implemented fair changes, dismantling Valerius's plots before they could take deep root. She showed that a queen did not need to be a warrior to be powerful. She could be a peacemaker, a bridge builder, a voice for the voiceless. Her ancestral lineage, revealed by Alara as a direct connection to the first Omegas who established the foundations of the Lycan kingdom, gave her a silent authority, an innate wisdom few could match. And what of Alpha Theron? The arrogant former Alpha, who had publicly rejected her, now languished in his own bitterness. He watched from afar, witnessing the meteoric rise of the woman he had called weak. The humiliation of being forced to bow before her, with Kaelin's menacing growl still echoing in his ears, was a heavy burden. The Supreme King did not need to rip out his throat, for Maya's very existence as queen was a torment worse than death for Theron. He was merely a local alpha, and she was the queen of all Lycans, his sovereign. The decisive moment came during a grand council of alphas, gathered at the High Fort Citadel to discuss the residual threats from Lord Valerius. Maya, now with the bearing of a true queen, sat beside Kaelin, her presence serene, yet undeniably powerful. When Theron attempted to raise a disrespectful objection, his eyes met Maya's. There was no longer the wounded, ashamed Omega he had rejected. There was a woman of quiet strength, with a gaze that held the wisdom of ages and the authority of a born leader. Kaelin, sensing the tension, merely placed a protective hand on Maya's shoulder, a silent reminder of his power and his loyalty. Theron, feeling the weight of all eyes and the king's silent warning, swallowed hard. He bowed, not merely formally, but with a genuine submission he never thought he would feel. "My queen," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible, but laden with a reverence he could no longer deny. King Kaelin smirked, a cold and satisfied smile, while Maya, with a dignified nod, accepted his submission. The kingdom of Eldoria prospered under the joint leadership of Kaelin and Maya. He, the pillar of strength and protection, the giant predator who became gentle only for her. She, the soul of the kingdom, the precious one who held the monster's heart, but who had revealed herself to be a force in her own right. A queen who governed with empathy and wisdom. Maya's story became a legend, a tale whispered around bonfires about the Omega, who didn't need claws or fangs to claim her place, but who found her true strength in kindness, resilience, and the ability to see beauty where others saw weakness. She proved that true strength did not reside in brutality, but in the capacity to love, to forgive, and to rise, always. Her bond with Kaelin, sealed under the moonlight, was proof that destiny, at times, chooses the most unexpected paths to reveal the greatest truths. Ultimately, Maya's journey was a reminder that the most potent strength often resides in those who are underestimated, in those who, like a gentle river, have the power to shape the world in ways the most powerful could never imagine. True royalty does not impose, it inspires. And Maya, the Omega who became queen, inspired everyone. And what about you? Have you ever considered what your own silent strength might be? If Maya's journey moved you, hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any fantastic stories, and comment below. Which character surprised you the most? Your opinion is very important to us.